When I hit 30 years old, I was working for a mortgage company and I didn't really have a clue what I wanted. I went back into the mortgage industry because I was already familiar with it. So it was kind of like going back to comfort. The issue was I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do and I was feeling stuck. Find out how I figured out what I wanted to do in my 30s coming up. Hey, I'm Sam with Systems of Impact, your place for growth-minded millennials looking to level up their careers. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss out on any videos as they're uploaded weekly. In my early 30s, I started back in the mortgage industry. Having come from the finance world and it just didn't do it for me, I went back into the mortgage industry because it was more comfortable. It was something I'd already done in the past. So starting over, I started as a secondary marketing analyst. And a secondary marketing analyst is whenever you go and lock a loan for a mortgage, I was on the other end locking that loan for the mortgage company. Starting in this new entry-level position, it allowed me to do something different because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. And because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, I needed to start experimenting with different avenues to then see what kind of curiosity could actually spark into that interest. Using the framework that I have in the passion video, and I'll link it at the end of this video, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But what I ended up doing is I started to get curious about different avenues. And so at this particular point in time, which I still to this day, I love video games. And I just finished the Avengers beta, and no, I will not be buying that game, just didn't do it for me. But video games as a whole, I truly do enjoy. And so what I ended up doing is I started to get curious about the different areas within the video game industry. And because I was curious of the video game industry, what I ended up looking at is the different avenues. And what I ended up landing on was an associate producer. And what an associate producer actually is it's essentially a project manager in the video game world. But I didn't know that at first. I had to get curious. I had to dig into what an associate producer did. So what I ended up doing is I started doing research. I started to get curious about what this position actually entailed, and then started to dig into what those job duties actually were. So for example, an associate producer essentially starts to look at, here's all the different things that you need to do for this video game, and then here's how we go ahead and get it done. So it's very tactical, just like a project manager. And so what I started to do after that is, okay, I went ahead and figured out, okay, here's what an associate producer does. This is essentially their job duties. Then I went out to those associate producers on LinkedIn and I started to talk with them and I started to build relationships and networked with them to better understand which companies I would actually enjoy working for, what kind of job duties I can expect, and what the overall culture of these companies actually would look like. So going through this process, I got curious about what an associate producer was. I started digging into what that actual job duty entailed, and then I used LinkedIn to really start to find who these people were already doing that job, and then started to talk with them to better understand what they did. But ultimately, I took that curiosity of that associate producer position and then correlated it to project management. And so because I ended up doing that, I started to dive deep into project management and better understanding and learning it. Ultimately, I ended up getting certified as a project manager. And because I got certified, it allowed me to use those skills that I was learning in that certification in my day-to-day job. And so it was, again, doing those two things in parallel. Because I was doing it for the mortgage company though, I was not going into the video game industry. I found out it just wasn't a good fit for me. And because it wasn't a good fit, I ended up shifting back into that mortgage company and diving deeper into there. Ultimately, having been promoted to a project manager, I ended up running a project management office as I was going through this process. So not just going through and learning everything and getting certified and doing the project management, but I also ended up doing a project management office that ran all of the projects for the mortgage company. And once I ended up going and taking a shift beyond the mortgage company, I ended up becoming a consultant and doing project management that way as well. So I was going into other companies and consulting them on how they can do better in project management. Going from that curiosity of, I want to do something in the video game industry, and finding out, and it was associate producer position, and then figuring it out that that's just a project manager in that industry, that ended up leading to roughly about 5 years of project management. I ended up going through, becoming a new project manager, and then doing a lot more senior level stuff, and then running a project management office, and then ultimately becoming a consultant in this world. All of that came because of that curiosity and following it where it led. To quickly recap, number one, where are you starting? It's foundational to understand where the starting line is, so that way you understand if you're making progress towards what you're actually moving towards. Number 2, get curious. What kind of areas are you curious about, and how can you see if that curiosity actually starts to move into that interest level? And once you find that interest, number 3, dive deep. Start digging deep into these areas, because once you start to dive deep, just like with the associate producer position, you'll start to see how those skills can start to transfer into different areas. But you won't find that out until you start to get curious and you find out digging deep into that interest. What's a job in your career path that you can get curious about and to really start digging into to find out, is that going to be the best path? Or is it going to require a pivot on your part to change? So what does that look like for you? I appreciate you taking some time for yourself to better understand what you can do in your 30s to start identifying what you can start doing for your career and what areas you could be potentially curious about. If you want to take this a bit deeper, I do have a free resource that goes over what your ideal life could look like. And through this process, you'll start to see different areas that you potentially never thought of, but then start getting curious about, which then starts to change what your career ends up looking like and ultimately what your ideal life would look like. Thanks again for your time, and I look forward to your success.